The first book I would like to talk about for my book talk project
is book that I would like to talk
the
about
early years
for my
of
book
John
talk
F.
project
Kennedy
for Library
by
271
Irene
is
Cooper.
The early years of John
This is
F.
one
Kennedy
of the books that I read for
Cooper.
Library
I really enjoyed this book because it had to do with the early years of JFK's life, from the time he was born until he was in high school, touching briefly on his college years and his years as president. The main focus was his childhood. And I really enjoyed this because I feel that those are years that not everyone knows about, and they were really interesting and really showed how he became the man and the president that he did. His childhood was very interesting. He was sick constantly, which I didn't know about, but found very interesting to read about how often he was in the hospital and what Jack was able to do to keep himself entertained and still lively, even though he spent so much time as a child and as a teenager in the hospital, missing out on typical children's activities. One of the stories talks about how one summer home from high school he had to miss out on hanging out at the beach and seeing all the girls because he was in the hospital, and that must have been really hard for a young teenage boy, but he survived it, and I think he became stronger for it. So I really enjoyed learning about these years that I never would have otherwise. The second book that I want to talk about is called Witches, the absolutely true tale of disaster in Salem, which details the Salem witch trials that occurred in Salem, Massachusetts. I've always kind of been fascinated by witches and the Salem witch trials, but never really did that much research on them. Just kind of what you hear and see in the movies. So I found this book really interesting because it really goes into details about how the trials were held and who was accused of being a witch, and how most of the accusations were done to people to get more land, or for other political or economic reasons. There are only a few accusers, and they tended to target their enemies, and they would just make stuff up that sounded frightening. But overall, only, I think it was 16. I think it was only a couple people that actually were killed during the Salem witch trials for being a witch, because they would have prison sentences instead of death if they confessed to being a witch. So a lot of the accused realized this, and admitted to being a witch so that they wouldn't be killed. The third book that I'm talking about tonight is called Gorilla Doctors Saving Endangered Great Apes by Pamela S. Turner. It is from a series of Scientists in the Field books, which discusses actual scientists while they're in the field. It focuses on the work that they do in the field. This book is focused on the mountain gorillas that are found mostly in Uganda. It talks about a couple of the gorilla doctors and what they do to help save these endangered great apes, how they work to educate the population about how humans cause harm to the apes, and try to protect the apes from the poachers that kill many of them and are one of the main reasons that these apes are endangered. But one of the other major predators or problems that the gorillas face are just humans in general. When the humans come in, they bring in diseases and other contaminations that the gorillas, because they're so biologically close to humans, catch but do not have the same immune system to deal with it. So I found this book very interesting and very great on educating children and others on why it is so important to be careful of the animals' habitats and to do whatever we can to protect them and make sure they survive for future generations. The last book I would like to discuss was also probably one of my favorite books that I've read so far, called The Trouble Begins at 8, A Life of Mark Twain, by Sid Fleischman. This tells kind of the story of Mark Twain's childhood when he was known as Samuel Clemens up through his becoming really famous, and this book just really made me sad that I was not alive to see one of Mark Twain's lectures. He was a brilliant lecturer and a very funny man. He is very quotable, and I would have loved to have seen him give a lecture. He's also one of my favorite authors, and so I really enjoyed reading about his history and what his life was like as a child and growing up on the Mississippi River and all the places he traveled to. I'd read a couple other biographies, but I really enjoyed this one because it focused on his time before he was Mark Twain instead of focusing on his life as Mark Twain. I really enjoyed it, and I love learning about all his adventures, and thought that the writing and the illustrations went well and enhanced the content of this book. Thank you.